All right, Whitney, have you ever been afraid to ride a motorcycle? Have you had to overcome fear on a motorcycle?
You want me to answer this in front of the entire Yammy Noob audience? You just want to expose my belly to the internet?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course I've been afraid.
Everyone's been afraid at some point.
Have you ever been afraid?
Of course. I think it's a super silly machismo thing to be like, I ain't never been scared. Everyone's been scared at some point. You've either been too far back on a wheelie and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Or a car's been, like you said, close call earlier off camera. There's a lot of fear around motorcycling, for sure. And I think the more we embrace it, the better riders we could be, maybe?
I think so.
Yeah. I think that's the whole topic on today's video. We're gonna talk about how to overcome fear on a motorcycle. This is a big open panel kind of format. We're gonna talk about fear on a motorcycle, if we've ever been afraid, why be afraid, crashing, overcoming a crash, and all kinds of good stuff. So stick around, it's gonna be a good one. So Whitney, you were telling me that you have been afraid on a motorcycle. Give me a time that you were afraid and what happened.
I think the first thing that comes up, the only time I've ever dropped a bike is when they were brand new and expensive. That like just deep fried my brain stem, nerves were on fire, but specifically this day 2 of owning my brand new R9T.
Oh no.
I was standing outside of a hotel and there was a group of people, they were like taking a tour, but they were all staring at me. I don't know if they thought I was somebody. So I'm like walking over to my bike, they're staring at me, I'm staring at them, I'm like getting on the bike. We're just like locked eyes and I'm like, should I wave or something? I didn't know what to do. Turn the bike on, roll on the throttle, and just ate it in front of 10 people.
Oh no.
Like I was not paying attention at all. And it was a brand new bike and it was heavier. And I just was squished on the ground.
It's a heavy bike too, so it's hard to pick up.
With my brand new, do you want to know what part hit the ground first?
The engine.
The engine.
Because those engines that's a stupid design on that bike. That's the first thing that hits the ground with the Boxer.
Luckily, my buddy was behind me. He gets out of the car and he's like, or did you have a stroke? And I was like, sorta. You know, and he helps me out. But I was like, it was so hard to get back on it because I was like, oh man, I just squished my brand new bike.
Yes.
10 people think I'm an idiot. I felt like I had something to prove to as a female rider that was being stared at. And I remember being super nervous. Yeah. Just to like, oh great, I'm gonna biff it again. Because from a street rider perspective, no track experience or dirt experience. Yeah. I'm not biffing it. Yeah. When you spend your whole life on the highway on big bikes, if you biff it, it's game over.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing is fear can help keep us within reason, right? I mean, that's why we have, I don't know what part of the brain it is that controls fear, but like, it's why we have it so that we don't do super dumb stuff, right? And why those people who don't have it have been weeded out from the evolutionary chain, right? Like you have all these people that would take all these big risks and ultimately would die. They're like, I'm gonna go kill that elephant by myself. It's like, good luck, it's not gonna work.
Now are we distilled like fearless, or is it the opposite?
I don't know, but I do think that fear on bikes keeps us in check. Yes. And I think it leads to some riders who, like you were talking about on camera, can spend hundreds of thousands of miles and have never crashed because they're operating in a super duper safe confines. But it is interesting because some riders like myself, we like to push boundaries, and we go to the track and motocross and do all kinds of dumb, silly stuff. It's funny because that's where I think the fear gets really pushed out to the boundaries because you're operating in this like, holy crap moment all the time. And then you get back on the street, you're like, wow, this is so chill.
I wish somebody would have told me that. It's like I grew up in an inner city, just buying heavy bikes and riding by myself. If somebody would have been like, you know what, get on a dirt bike. Yeah. Because that really, I could feel my brain growing when your back end is wobbling, your front end, but you're staying up. That changes everything. Yeah, it changes everything. And operating in that environment where even if you were to have a spill, it wouldn't be a big deal. No. You then realize that crashing isn't that bad, But it can be bad, right? Like crashing on road can be super gnarly. I have experience with that, unfortunately, and it can be really gnarly. And I do think that fear helps us keep us in check. But do you think it's reasonable for people who are looking to approach motorcycling for the first time, beginner riders, is it reasonable for them to be a little afraid, a little trepidatious about it? I think we need to discern fear from caution. Fear is bad. Caution keeps you alive. And I think caution is, you're kind of coming from a place of responsibility. Yeah. Like, hey, how am I taking this road? Where am I going? Am I geared up? kind of having a more 360 perspective when it comes to riding your motorcycle versus like if you're super scared, or maybe you had too much coffee, or you're having some sort of intrusive thought, or maybe you crashed and it's hard to get back on a bike. I don't know if I'm like, oh yeah, just get on. That's maybe not the best way to ride, but integrating that fear and turning it into caution is how I would probably approach it.
Yeah, I think it's super important to have that mental game plan before you get to the bike.
Yes.
Like you said, knowing what your game plan is going to be, not being out of focus, having a plan that you're going to ride safely, you're going to ride correctly, because it doesn't take much to be out of focus and have a boo-boo happen, it doesn't take much, right? Bikes are temperamental little creatures sometimes, and might be a bit of gravel in the road, or you misjudge an apex and all of a sudden you're down.
How did you deal with, after crashing, getting back on a motorcycle?
Yeah, so nowadays, if I crash, and I'll tell a small story. I was just on the motocross track recently, and I completely ate it going into a braking zone. I tucked the front end and just completely wiped out. I broke my toe. I sprained my ankle. It was a lot of fun, right? The thing I did immediately was some nice guys got my bike out, and they were like, "Hey man, do you want us to like walk your bike back to your truck?" I was like, "No, I'm getting on it." And I knew that I had to get back on it as soon as I possibly could to overcome that mental barrier of like, the last thing that I remember on a motorcycle is me tucking the front and crashing. So I always try to do that. If my body is good enough, I'm gonna try to at least to get on it and ride a little bit. Obviously, sometimes that can't happen. Like I had a pretty catastrophic accident back in 2017, almost 6 years ago. I was not gonna jump back on. It took me 18 months to get back on a bike.
Wow.
And I remember in that time, it was a lot of in here just being like, holy crap, like, am I really gonna do this again? Am I really gonna do this again? Should I do this again?
Were you alone were you sharing your experience with fellow riders to like help you get back, or were you just isolated trying to process it by yourself?
Second option, yeah.
Really?
I think it was better for me because I kept hearing, I had a lot of like dude bro friends at the time. They're like, bro, just get back on, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, okay. I need to approach this differently,
So had you had like maybe more lady friends who were like, well, let's think about that, like, versus like, dude, it doesn't matter, just get back on.
I'm married now. I would talk to my wife, but back then I was single, and I didn't have many lady friends that I could speak to about motorcycling with. As you know, Whitney, you guys are pretty rare in the community, so it's mostly a dude fest.
Maybe you should come up with a panel of elder women that you can, discuss.
Maybe you should have a YouTube channel where you talk about women rider things.
That's a great
Go follow
idea.
Whitney on, is it Whitney Does, right?
Whitney Does.
Whitney Does on YouTube. You can go and check her out. She's making all kinds of good
content.
Of course, yeah. That was a perfect segue. That's what I do.
But so you were isolated, and that worked better for you?
Yes, I literally had to take like a road trip by myself to like the like kind of Rockies and Utah and stuff. And I spent 3 weeks out there by myself.
On a motorcycle?
No, in a car, because I couldn't ride at the time because I was still recovering.
Oh.
But I had to spend a lot of time just like contemplating like what it is that I'm doing, why I'm doing it,
Yeah.
I think that helped a lot, but that was a super catastrophic accident, and that's the hardest ones to come back from, where you're like, I might lose my life doing this, And I was telling you off camera where you're like, when you really think about motorcycling, you're like, why on earth would you do this?
You said it was because we were stupid. It's hard to
put me on blast
that.
That.
You said you embodied that it's stupidity to kind of hop on this thing that's inherently dangerous and just go. But I keep thinking, I was like, there's a crazy nougat of desire, and maybe it's fueled by generations of motorcycle racers on the other side going like, no, just hop on, like, come on, we got to have fun. That desire to me is what made me get back on the bike. I never hung up my helmet. When I was pregnant, I kept riding, like there was nothing, there's inherent desire there.
100%. I don't know what it is, but if you like motorcycles, there's just, there's a calling, there's something about them that just feels so goddamn good. And that's the thing for me. This maybe doesn't speak to every realm of riding, but for me it was anti-anxiety because it was so involved. You have to shift your throttle. You could smell like beautiful prairies that you're going through. The temperature changes. Suddenly my brain had something to eat versus just sitting in a car going like this. And that maybe motorcyclists are smarter.
I don't know. Like I said, that doesn't always apply, but it gives us something more to think about and do as we ride.
I think motorcyclists, we want to be like involved in an experience. We seek out a richness of experience. I don't want to settle for just a car. I want to have everything around me. I want to feel this thing. I want to have all of it, you know? Like I don't want to settle for the veneer of an experience. I want to be in the experience, you know? And I think for me, the biggest thing that I felt whenever I started riding, I was like, I can't believe how visceral motorcycles are. I was like, wow, they're like alive. You know, you feel them. You do things on them. They react instantly, you know?
And some of them plug into your brain.
Yes.
There are some like Aprilias and Ducatis that are so...
Only Aprilias and Ducatis, no freaking Japanese bikes. They don't have that effect.
No, man, when I ride an MT10, I feel like I'm just going where it's taking me. But an Aprilia, like I remember the V4 1100 factory, it was psychic.
Yes.
Like it was so in tune with every single thing that you did, which when you're not a go fast person inherently like you, I'm like, okay, I know I'm an idiot. Like it keeps telling me I'm an idiot. I get it.
It's hard to say, like, you know, where that intersects with fear and like our desire to ride them. There's people who are going to ride and there's people who just won't ride, you know? I really believe that. I really believe that if you have this inside of you that you want to go ride a motorcycle, you have to chase that desire. It's not going to go away. And you can't really fuel it with other stuff. Some people try, like there's drugs, there's jumping out of airplanes, there's other stuff you can do to get that. But I really think bikes are a bit unique.
And I've heard so many people in my life over the course of my riding career being like, I had a close call and that was it. And you're like, man.
That's all it took? Like, really?
I was like, man, one time I was on a one-way and there was a car coming the other way. But on a motorcycle, I felt agile. I just got out of the way. If I was in a car,
you're kind of stuck.
Would have been game over.
Yeah.
It is, maybe that's just level of desire. Obviously, we all have different nervous systems.
True.
Right?
And I don't want to shame anybody if you've gotten afraid of a bike and you don't want to ride them anymore. That is totally fine. It's not for everybody, and I think you need to understand your limitations too. There's been some people where I've seen them kind of get started with motorcycle, and I'm like, this isn't for you, you know? Like
really, you've seen that?
I have seen that before in my personal life. Yeah, I don't want to put out any names, but there was somebody in my personal life where they were like, yeah, I want to start riding. I'm like, no, that's not gonna work out for you. You know, like you're not that coordinated. You maybe like your risk tolerance.
Probably.
Pretty
key.
It's pretty key. I think some people, you know, they end up just doing a little too much. They get into trouble. It's a dangerous thing, you know, inherently. And I think that it's important for you to recognize your own limitations with it, you know.
And it's funny. I remember we were at the drag strip, and I was on the FTR, and you're like, "Oh, did you go wide open?" And I was like, "No." I was like, "Why would I do that?" And you're like, wide open.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, what are you talking about? And you were like, well, I always go wide open because I want to see what the bike can do.
Yeah.
And then I responded, I was like, well, I know what the bike can do. But I was like, I wonder if that's inherent caution.
I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting because every bike I get on, I will try to go wide open with it. The only bike I have not been able to do that was with my H2 because it terrified me to do that. It genuinely, like, that was my limit.
Making 300 and, you know.
I actually went to the guy, so it's not here right now. I took it back and it was dynoed at 335 wheel horsepower on 85. And that was my limit where I was like, I honest to God did not have the testicular fortitude to I couldn't do it. That was my limit.
If you were given, maybe at the salt flats, right?
Maybe, but even then I'm like, dude, I don't know, man. Like, it's just terrifying. Like I said, you all got to know our limits, right? So do you feel that whenever you're on any bike where you're like, are you too afraid to go wide open? Is that what it is? Or is it?
Like, you talk about fear, but I'm like, well, I like to fart around. I love motorcycles. I love how they look. I love riding. You are performance reality.
Yes.
Right? Ask me how much horsepower any of my motorcycles are. Not a clue. It's just different strokes for different folks.
Totally.
You're a sport bike person. Granted, I had an XSR.
Yeah. Pretty sporty.
I was wondering too if that had something to do with, I don't know, wide open on my XSR. Oh, maybe once.
It's so sad.
I was like, no, wait, on the back straight at Coda, I definitely went wide open, but I would never do that on the highway. But I just I'm just that desire to like test the limit of the power band isn't there. I don't know.
It just, what we were talking about earlier, it just feels freaking good.
It feels
You're like, let's
good.
see what this thing can do, you know?
It feels good.
It feels good. Like,
Okay.
whenever I'm on the V4S or the Turbo Boost or whatever it is, if I'm not on track, I like to open it up. It's just, there's some monkey part of the brain. You're like, let's freaking open this thing up. And then that's where you kind of start to overcome the fears. You know, if you ride responsibly, you kind of start on a smaller bike, you push it up a little bit.
I didn't do that. I did the opposite.
Yeah, and so maybe that's why, right? Like, you never had the feeling of just disrespecting a little bike. No. It's the best feeling whenever you just start disrespecting a little bike.
I think it's not necessarily fear, but I think I did everything backwards.
Yeah.
And so I'm inherently like, oh Jesus, like why? I'm doing 120. It's fine. You know, it's like. But also, you gave me instructions on how to go wide open. I was like, oh, okay, that's different than what I thought it is. So
yeah, I still remember your Fireblade video, where you were just like in second gear the whole time, just pinging it, and I'm like, that must have been terrifying because you're not riding it right, you know, like. Definitely
not riding it right. You also, it was so funny. Like, we were at the gas station. You were giving me like the pep talk. You were like, okay, look, X, Y, Z, this is gonna happen. I was like. Yam, you are lighting a match in a barn full of dry hay. You know, because I was like, oh, it's just my boss's $30,000 motorcycle. Great. There was a lot of fear. That was actually, there's been 2 bikes in the however many bikes we've ridden that I was afraid to ride.
Yeah.
That was one of them because it was expensive and my history with expensive bikes.
That's fair. That's fair.
And the ZH2, I was terrified, but everything else was fun.
Yeah. That's interesting. So there was a component of like the expense and the high cost was a little
that freaked me out.
A little afraid of it. Yeah.
That freaked me out.
Have you, so you told me you've never, other than dropping your bikes, you've never crashed a motorcycle?
No.
Off-road, you've never?
Well,
I guess you had a little spill or something in Utah, right? Yeah.
And I was on the GS 750. I was going over the handlebars, and by the 4th time, I was like, get me in the support Jeep Gladiator. I'm done. I felt like I was like training for something.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was like, there's only 90 more miles. And I was like,
yeah, we had like 20 miles of sand to go through. I was like, Jesus Christ, this is annoying. But yeah.
But no, I've never like biffed it hard off road. I've never biffed it on the street.
So you don't know what it feels like to come off a bike and for it to like properly hurt, right?
No.
That's wild.
No.
Because for me, like when I started racing and doing track days and riding off road and stuff, I liked the feeling. I didn't like the feeling of crashing. That's gonna make me sound crazy, but I liked knowing what it felt like to be like, oh, wasn't that bad? Like when I first low-sided a bike, I was like, that wasn't that bad. Okay, like I could do that again. That's no biggie, you know? But then I've seen other guys on crash track and they flip and break collarbones and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So I think it really depends, but.
It would be cool to know where the limits are versus just where I'm at, which is like, oh, okay. I'm on a bike, this is great, you know, farting around. You're doing it for a different component that I don't quite understand, but I'm curious.
So let me ask you this, and this could maybe be our wrap up. If someone has fear around motorcycling, what would you suggest to them?
Come see your motorcycle therapist and let's talk about it. I think you have to look at your desire. Is it a full tank of desire? Is this something you really love? I've never questioned it.
Yeah, me either.
Never questioned it.
No, never.
I don't know how many of people.
There is no reality in which I don't ride motorcycles. No. There's just not.
No, I remember seeing a guy off South Congress who didn't have legs, but he had the motorcycle with.
Hell yeah.
I was like,
hell yeah.
That's me.
I'm
taking notes in case I ever lose my legs because my dog is going to sit in the sidecar.
It's not stopping.
It's not stopping.
Yeah.
That to me is like, if you were afraid and you're like, yeah, I have desire. Okay. Go into a parking lot, maybe go out early in the morning, get a different bike, borrow a friend's bike, you know, if they've got like a lighter bike or something. I would examine that. That's where I would start. Or if you're like, no, not for me, that was great. You know, I know people like that who tried it, don't want it.
Totally. Yeah. And again, going back to what I said earlier, if you are one of those people, don't push it, you know, don't be like, I have to do this because whatever reason, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. But
if you're feeling isolated in your anxieties, we've all been there.
100%.
We've all been there. 100%. And I think if you found some like logical, reasonable motorcycle friends that you could maybe integrate, you gotta integrate it regardless, because it's gonna come out in some other aspect of your life. And I think that's important to do for your nervous system and in general. But I do think it's worth it. I know that it's a hard thing to talk about, right? Like,
Yeah.
we've all known people who've lost their lives on motorcycles.
Yep.
It's an inherently dangerous thing, but I'm supposed to ignore this desire? It's like, I'd rather try to help people.
Yeah.
Let's be better riders.
I think there's not really a positive in living your life afraid of things and not doing things. Like, life is just really short to exist in fear of things and just be like, well, I have this desire, but I'm too afraid and it's objectively a bad idea. It's like, you're really gonna spend your whole life living like that? Like, it's just kind of a bummer.
Now there's schools.
Yeah.
There's tracks. I know personal coaches that will help you through stuff. There's options now.
There's lots of options. Whitney, any last points on fear and motorcycling?
I could go on forever about integration and anxieties and stuff, but I think we're kind of here to be like, it exists, it's real, we've both experienced it, and you can overcome it. I think it's possible.
Yes.
It's like, whether you drop your brand new BMW in front of a crowd or whatever, or you're forced to ride a bike that scares you for a YouTube channel and you do it anyway. I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
I'm so glad
That's the through line, right? Where, like, even though you were afraid, you're glad you did it, you know?
One of them became my favorite bikes of all time.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite bikes of all time too. I wish I had another one.
I was scared of leader bikes after that.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I felt more confident. So that's the through line.
Yeah. That's the through line, folks. All right, folks, thank you so much for watching today's video. We're definitely gonna get Whitney back on the channel because today's video was actually her going wide open throttle on the V4S, which we're gonna do. We have a whole game plan of how you're gonna go wide open throttle on that bike. Yeah. It's a religious experience. It's very, very good. You'll feel like Pecco Bagnaia. I mean, you heard how that thing sounds, you know?
It's nuts.
Yeah, and being on it is even better.
Pecco, let's channel him.
Let's channel the Pecco. So when the weather clears up, we're gonna do that. But thanks again for Whitney for coming out. Check out her channel, Whitney Does. She's making a bunch of cool content. And thanks again for talking to us about fear in motorcycling.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure to come back on the channel and talk the things that I love about motorcycling, our brains.
Yeah, that's right. All right, folks, we'll catch you in the next one. See you later. Well, look at you. You've made it to the end of another Yammy Noob video. You should consider yourself pretty lucky because I have curated this one right over here for you to continue watching. It's probably just as good as the one you just saw. Unless you hated the one you just saw. I don't know, maybe leave me a comment down below about how much you hated it as well too. Or just keep watching this one. Make sure you keep watching Yammy Noob. Don't forget to keep watching Yammy Noob. That's the most important thing. Keep watching Yammy Noob.